I wanted to sketch in the way I see the problems of sustainability and responsibility, and to argue that it's now time to take responsibility. Sustainable tourism and responsible tourism are definitely not the same thing. Sustainability is an abstract long-term goal, and most of the industry and most governments work on short-termism. So they're never going to achieve sustainability. Responsible tourism is about what people actually do to achieve sustainability. So there's a difference between the abstract aim and what you do to achieve it. And really the focus of the WTM Responsible Tourism Programme is on people who are doing things to achieve sustainability. We're 40 years on now from the 1972 World Commission on Environment and Development. There have been 4 World Summits in that time, every 10 years. 1972 also saw publication of the Limits to Growth, which people laughed about at the time and said it would never happen. In reality, some checks that were done by Melbourne University demonstrated that those projections were almost entirely correct, and the limits to growth are a serious problem for us as a species. We're simply not making progress fast enough. Now, over-tourism is what happens. We know about the over-tourism in Spain, particularly in Barcelona, but it's also a problem in Britain. The photograph on the top right there is of Snowdon on an August Bank Holiday Monday. Now, who on earth wants to go up Snowdon and have to wait to summit in a queue? This is not a great experience. So over-tourism is what happens when tourism is not managed sustainably. It's the opposite of responsible tourism. It's the antithesis of what the WTM programme is about. It's a consequence of not having placed sufficient priority on sustainability over the last 40 years. People have kept talking about it, but they haven't done it. They're always putting off doing something about it. UNWTO have started their Travel, Enjoy, Respect campaign, and that reflects the fact that obviously consumers need to be responsible too, because it's the way we behave in destinations which to a significant extent creates the problem of over-tourism. The photograph on the left there is a genuine photograph. Cricketer Holidays ran it only once. They're a good company. I'm not criticising them at all. But they spoke the truth. Whenever a place gets spoilt, we move on. The consequence, of course, is what's called in Barcelona sometimes Carcelona. Good for the tourists, bad for the neighbours. What we all aspire to is the kind of thing they have in Ludlow, where visitors are treated as temporary residents. It's a much different experience to go there. But they manage their tourism so that they don't get too many visitors. The WTM programme next year, the 2 major themes will be over-tourism and coping with success. They're obviously the same theme. It's just that some people are still in denial about having a problem with over-tourism. But next year's major theme will be over-tourism. I just wanted to pick up on some of the major issues as I see them. Carnival Cruises, the chief, has come out and said recently that the industry must listen to locals on the issue of over-tourism. We'll see what happens, but that is a senior industry leader beginning to recognise that there's a problem. Another big problem we have is greenwashing. It's a real challenge. Responsible tourism is now just trotted out like sustainable tourism used to be. And we need to challenge that. Because what we don't need is a levelling down of what's meant by responsibility. We need to be challenging people to be very clear about what they're actually doing and what the impacts of their actions are. The evidence matters, and you'll see that in the Responsible Tourism Awards on Wednesday morning on the global stage. We're recognising then some of the leaders in responsible tourism, and they have the evidence to demonstrate that they are making a difference. It's more than just words. We create the carbon emissions. Any of you who've seen the latest news coming out of America, it's very clear that the problem is getting worse fast. The scientists' predictions, and these are American scientists, is a global sea level rise of up to 8 feet by the end of the century. Risks of drought and flooding, we're already seeing that. More frequent wildfires and devastating storms. The argument about climate change will fester and continue. But the reality is that we need to deal with it now. And the scale of that problem you can see in the hotel industry. This is Green Hotelier, the voice of the International Tourism Partnership, saying that hotels' climate change commitment means 90% reduction in carbon. That's an ambitious target, and it needs to be reached. New this year, we've got an emphasis on plastic pollution. We're very pleased to have the stand there. We've entered the Anthropocene, and by that I mean that you can now see in the geological record the pollution from our civilizations. Plastic will be there in the geology of Britain for the foreseeable future. It's a big challenge, and the tourism industry is a big contributor to it. The sustainable tourism goals have not really been taken up. We've had a year of the International Year of Sustainable Tourism for Development. A few companies have responded, but really it's been very disappointing. There has been more progress this year on the issue of orphanage tourism. We have 2 sessions tomorrow, one on orphanages, the other on human trafficking, which will be some of the best sessions, I think, of this year's programme. Don't miss them if you're here. And finally, I wanted to remind you all that the issue is about taking responsibility. Thank you for listening. Are there any questions? Jeremy.
Hello, Harold. It's Jeremy Smith, writer, editor of Trevindi. You started by talking about the limits to growth from 40 years ago, and we've been therefore talking about the problems for 40 years. And you made a small reference to Ludlow as somewhere that you see as a success. Other than just abstractions, what do you see that is actually making a difference and working?
I think the problem is, Jeremy, that there are lots of individual examples by particular companies, some of them here today. The problem is that the vast bulk of the industry is not changing. And it's not until we see change in the bulk of the industry. And that's why I've always argued against the focus on ecotourism. So it's very easy to say that responsibility is over there with the ecotourism. What we need to be addressing is the mainstream tourism. And I guess the fact that the CEO of Carnival Cruises has come out and said there's a problem about over-tourism is possibly a big step forward. But it depends what happens after that. The words are the easy bit. The doing something about it is more difficult. But I hope in the programme next year we'll have people from the cruise industry talking about how they're going to address the problem of over-tourism.
But, I mean, the UNWTO makes it very clear that in their mind, growth is not the problem with over-tourism, it's how we manage it. And yet you're saying that 40 years ago it was growth, and we continue to say that. So we are differing there.
No, I think the UNWTO is rightly concerned about tourism phobia, and I think they're right to be that. But the phobia of tourists is when the tourists are not managed in a sustainable way. Now, we can increase the number of tourists going to places sustainably if we put the investment into management. But you won't be able to solve the problem that way forever. There comes a point where you simply can't absorb any more people, which is why we hear people now talking about limiting the number of people in St Mark's Square, or I would like to see a limit on the number of people in Trafalgar Square. There's a number of places around the world which are overvisited, and Snowdon clearly has a big problem with capacity on bank holidays. So another question.
So, hi, my name is Karen. I'm from Expedition Travel. And you mentioned about this year, of course, being the International Year of Sustainable Tourism, and you said that it hasn't been very successful. In your mind or in your vision, what would have been a successful year for international sustainable tourism? When
we launched the awards on the Sustainable Development Goals in May, I was hopeful that we would see a larger number of applications. We still store very good applications. I don't want to take away from the winners. They are excellent applications this year. But I was surprised that there were so few. Really the shift that needs to come now is people need to be challenged, not just to talk the talk, but to demonstrate what they've achieved in terms of impacts by what they're doing.
Do you have any idea why there was so little application? Why there was so few applications?
I think because we put a lot of emphasis on having the data to back up the statements that people were making. But that's the way it's going to go. And there's a panel tomorrow on certification, for example, making exactly that point. We need to move on from just certification to people talking about what they've actually delivered.